Hi everyone, welcome back to this AZ-900 Azure Fundamentals training. If this series is helping you learn Azure, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next lessons. In the previous lesson, you learned about core Azure Compute Services, virtual machines, app service, containers, and functions. You saw how applications actually run in Azure. In this lesson, we will focus on another fundamental part of any cloud solution: storage. By the end of this video, you will be able to describe 4 important Azure storage options: Blob Storage, Disk Storage, File Shares, and Queue Storage. You will also understand when to use each option in an AZ-900 exam scenario. Here is what we will cover in this lesson. First, we will review what Azure Storage is at a high level. Second, we will talk about blob storage for unstructured data. Third, we will describe disk storage for virtual machines. Fourth, we will explain file shares for SMB-based file storage. Finally, we will introduce queue storage for simple message-based communication between components. Let's start with the big picture of Azure Storage. Azure Storage is a collection of services that provide durable, scalable, and secure storage in the cloud. Azure Storage is designed to store large amounts of data, and it automatically replicates data to protect it from hardware failures. Some key characteristics of Azure Storage include high durability and availability, encryption at rest and in transit, access over standard protocols and SDKs, different storage tiers and redundancy options to balance cost and performance. For the AZ-900 exam, you should recognize the main storage types and their typical use cases: blob, disk, files, and queues. Let's start with Azure Blob Storage. Azure Blob Storage is designed to store unstructured data as objects, called blobs. Unstructured data is data that does not follow a fixed schema, such as documents and text files, images and videos, backups and logs, large binary files. Blob storage is ideal when you need to store large amounts of data that can be accessed over HTTP or HTTPS. Blobs are stored inside containers, and containers live inside a storage account. You can control access at the account, container, or blob level, and you can expose blobs publicly or keep them private. There are different types of blobs, but for AZ-900, you mainly need to know that blob storage is used for storing files for web and mobile applications, storing backups and archives, serving static content like images, videos, and documents, storing big data for analytics. In exam scenarios, if you see store large files, unstructured objects, or serve static content over the internet, the correct answer is usually Azure Blob Storage. Next, let's look at Azure Disk Storage. Azure Disk Storage provides virtual hard disks for Azure Virtual Machines. When you create a VM, you attach one or more disks to it: an operating system disk, which contains the OS; one or more data disks, which store application data. These disks are stored in Azure as managed disks. Azure takes care of the availability, durability, and storage infrastructure for those disks. Disk storage offers different performance tiers, such as standard HDD, standard SSD, and premium SSD, to support different workload types and performance needs. Typical use cases for Azure Disk Storage include persistent storage for virtual machines, databases running inside VMs, any workload where you need block-level storage attached to a VM. In AZ-900 questions, if the scenario is clearly about storage for virtual machines, or mentions OS disk, data disk, or attach a disk to a VM, the correct answer is Azure Disk Storage. Now, let's move to Azure Files. Azure Files provides fully managed file shares in the cloud, using the SMB protocol. This means you can mount an Azure file share on Windows, Linux, or macOS machines, just like a traditional file share on a file server. Azure Files is useful when you need to lift and shift existing applications that expect a file share, but you do not want to maintain your own file server virtual machines. Typical use cases for Azure File shares include shared configuration files and application data, centralized file storage from multiple VMs or on-premises servers, replacing on-premises file servers with a managed cloud solution. You can mount Azure File shares from VMs in Azure, and also from on-premises systems using VPN or ExpressRoute, or the Azure File Sync service. For the AZ-900 exam, if the scenario mentions SMB file shares, shared file storage accessible from multiple machines, or replace on-premises file servers, the correct answer is usually Azure Files. Now let's talk about Azure Queue Storage. Azure Queue Storage provides a simple message queue service for storing and retrieving messages between components. A queue is a list of messages, and components of your application can send messages to the queue and process them asynchronously. This is useful for building loosely coupled, distributed systems. Typical use cases for queue storage include background processing of tasks, decoupling front-end and back-end components, handling workloads where some work can be processed later, implementing simple, reliable messaging between services. Messages in queue storage are small text or binary messages, retrieved and processed by worker components. In AZ-900 scenarios, if you see a requirement like send messages between components, asynchronous processing, or decouple front-end from back-end, the correct answer may be Azure Queue Storage, or another messaging option, depending on the question. For this lesson, remember that queue storage is the basic queue service in Azure Storage, suitable for simple message-based communication. Let's now compare these 4 storage options at a high level. Blob Storage stores unstructured data as objects, blobs. Great for large files, backups, and static content. Accessed over HTTP or HTTPS. Disk storage provides virtual hard disks for VMs. Used for OS and data disks. Block-level storage attached to virtual machines. File shares, Azure Files. Managed SMB file shares in the cloud. Accessible from multiple machines as a network drive. Good for lift and shift scenarios and shared file storage. Queue storage. Simple message queues for communication between components. Useful for asynchronous and background processing. Helps build loosely coupled systems. Each of these services solves a different storage need, and the AZ-900 exam will often test whether you can choose the appropriate one. From an exam perspective, it helps to map keywords to the right service. Unstructured data, large files, static website, backup, blob storage. VMOS disk, data disk, storage for virtual machines, disk storage. SMB file share, network file share, shared file storage, Azure Files. Messages between components, queue, asynchronous processing, queue storage. If you remember these patterns, you will be in a strong position for storage-related questions in AZ-900. Let's recap what you learned in this lesson. You learned that Azure Storage provides durable, scalable, and secure storage services. And you focused on 4 of the most important ones for AZ-900. Blob storage for unstructured data and large files. Disk storage for virtual machine disks. Azure Files for SMB-based file shares. Queue storage for simple message queues between components. You saw the main use cases for each service, and how to recognize them in exam-style scenarios. These storage services are essential building blocks for almost any real-world solution built on Azure. If this lesson helped you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. To support the content and to follow the next lessons in this AZ-900 series. In the upcoming videos, we will look at Azure networking and database services. so that you can complete your understanding of Azure Fundamentals for the exam. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.